Good evening. Welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring women-owned businesses from across the country. And now, for your host, Kimberly McElroy.
All right. Good evening and welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses from across the country. I am your host, Kimberly McElroy, CEO and founder of the Women's Small Business Initiative, LLC, and award-winning author. Welcome to another night of sharing. With us, we have Sara McElroy, journalist, career transition expert at Raze to Rise. Sara is a former hustle culture devotee, ex-chief marketing officer, the Wall Street Journal's poster girl for pandemic career burnout, and a two-time member of the Great Resignation, class of 2021 and 2022. Following a stress-induced shingles diagnosis in early 2021, Sara decided to hit the reset button on her life. She quit her hard-won CMO job and trekked to Peru's Sacred Valley to reset her frayed nervous system. When she returned, she relocated from the busy metropolis of Atlanta to the beach of South Florida for a new job and a fresh start. But she once again encountered deeply ingrained cultural issues in her new role, and ultimately she walked away again, finding herself in the company of millions of other women who also set unfulfilling jobs ablaze during the Great Resignation. She returned to her journalism roots and began to explore the stories, breaking points, and defining moments that led women to seek greater opportunity mid-pandemic. These conversations became the genius of Raze to Rise, an organization created to amplify women's voices from the Great Resignation and inspire others to blaze new trails in their own careers. So without further ado, please help me welcome to my platform, Miss Sara McElroy. Hello, Sara. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing very well, Kimberly. Thank you so much for having me here tonight.
Oh, it is my pleasure, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Indeed. It's a hot topic these days.
It is. But, when we talked a little bit earlier before we got started, as I was saying, we don't have a lot of people who are as willing to actually focus on this conversation and really talk about how you made this decision to do this Great Resignation. But before we dive into that portion of the conversation, why don't you tell my listeners a little bit more about who Sara McElroy really is?
Yes, definitely. Well, I am a former CMO and really always was the good girl, the corporate good girl. I thought that was what I always wanted, to reach the C-suite. And so I was so proud of myself when I reached that level in 2020. It was like such a dream, and I was so proud to have reached that job by the age of 35. But it was a very difficult awakening that came out of that, although very positive now, right? But difficult in that time because I'm in this job. That culture itself was pretty toxic. I was the youngest member on the executive team, and I was treated as the kid sister, and at times even kind of worse than that. And it was like, I am so empty and so hollow, and I'm working up to 20 hours a day between work and an executive MBA program, and knowing that the team there already was kind of treating me as if I didn't deserve to have that seat at the table, even though obviously I was hired for the job and recruited by an executive search firm for it. It was like, okay, well, I can't show any weakness. I have to prove that I'm worth my salt and I deserve to be here. And I have to get through graduation as well. So, yeah, it was just like, I'm going to start working up to 20 hours a day, not every single day. And it wasn't like, I guess I wasn't conscious in that regard, but it just happened like that, where it's like, you just got to get it done. And it's almost like when we get going like that in a way that is so unsustainable and we lose control, it becomes like, for me, I describe it as my legs were moving and I just couldn't stop. Like they were running. It was like the hamster wheel was going and I just couldn't stop because otherwise I'd be thrown off, kind of a thing. So yeah, it was difficult. I had a couple of episodes of throwing up blood that ultimately culminated with a shingles diagnosis. And when I was diagnosed with shingles and I am sitting in the doctor's office, I hear the doctor tell me I have shingles. I am overjoyed, which
Wow.
sounds like such a strange thing to say. But for me, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get 10 days off. Well, it was like 8 work days, but 10 straight days off from work. And this is going to be amazing because I wouldn't have to raise, my hand and say, I can't keep up. I'm struggling. I'm not doing well and admit essentially weakness to these people that already were questioning my capabilities. It was a socially acceptable reason, and nobody at work could tell me I couldn't do it. And I'm also spared the self-judgment that would have come from having to admit those things. So it just became a realization in that moment that was like, okay, Sara, I know you worked so hard for this life, like perfect on paper life, because my resume was my life at the time. But it was like, we can't do this anymore. So that's why I hit the reset button and moved down to Florida.
Wow. All right. So we're going to backtrack because, what you just said was very profound. But, as we go through, years of growing up, we're always constantly being told that, hey, you have to do A, B, C, and D. And the big part of A, B, C, and D is you grow up, you get education, you get a great job. But at the same token, it's the constant ordeal of having to kill yourself in order to get to where you're getting to. And, and I'm listening to your story and thinking in my head, why is it that we always have to overprove ourselves? We have to prove ourselves as a woman. We have to prove ourselves on paper. And then once you get off the paper and you're there in that environment, it's always something else that has to come with that process. And not that you're not grateful for getting the job, but then just not being accepted.
Exactly.
So,
Kimberly, thank you. Yes, you summarized perfectly.
Yeah, just it's the constant sickness and tiredness of not just being accepted for who you are, just allowing you to grow in the position so that you can have the life that you want and, and feel good about your accomplishments instead of having to feel like you have to be beat over the head and have to, working 20 hours a day, whether, officially or non-officially. We are normally working more than 8 hours. You're working 10 or more. You're never going to get paid beyond the 8 hours anyway. But yet still, it's the attitude of, well, if I don't work these hours, then like you said, nobody's going to respect you. They're going to look at you as a nobody, even though you have the credentials to prove it. And at that point, you're still working the job and proving it, but you still have to do way too much. What's the saying that they always have, you have to be the first person in and the last person to leave in order to be taken serious, which is ridiculous. Completely ridiculous.
Yep, I agree. I know. It's this whole, the paradigm that hustle culture created. Here's what I'll say. If I'm completely honest, I say that I was a hustle culture devotee because I worshipped hustle culture, because for me it was a way to justify my very sad, if I'm completely honest, sad one-noted existence, because I was Sara career and Sara school, and that was it. I had no personal life. I rarely saw any friends. That was all that I was, and so much of my identity, my value, my self-worth, everything was tied up in all of that. And so we, especially this kind of self-objectification is really insidious and a really damaging act when we start to attach our own value and worth to what we're able to produce for an employer, or even how we show up and deliver anything in our lives, right? It could even be in our relationships, but it's a really damaging thing. And the way that hustle culture was venerated and applauded for a long time, for me, it was I'm doing the right thing. I'm climbing the ladder. Look, it's good. This is a good thing. And it's amazing how we all bought into that for a period of time, but it's very clear that the girl boss has been declared dead several times over now. And that's not being a female boss. That's that girl boss hustle culture, do it all, run all day long mentality. And I'm glad to see that we're starting to say to ourselves that it doesn't have to be this way.
Right. But what you're talking about, this hustle culture of, got to do it all, that's ingrained into women, period. We have been brought into this world from the time we can breathe and can listen and learn and speak, we're always told, women, we're the nurturers. We do everything. We do this to ourselves. We put our families in the same situation because everybody's put first beyond us, right? So, and before us. So, then we definitely are going to put that into our work environment because we always have to have something to prove because society has told us for our whole entire life, this is where women should be. This is where they shouldn't be. This is how they're supposed to act. And we are still seeing it today. It's like,
exactly.
People have fought for us for years to not have to have this lifestyle, but then we're constantly, like you said, in this rat race, this little mouse on this wheel, constantly going in circles, doing the same thing over and over. So it's like, it's kind of like a tug of war where it's hard to figure out what direction we want to go because we do want to be happy about what we've accomplished and we should have that right. But it seems like when you want to have that happiness of accomplishment that you're being constantly grilled and criticized, and then what do? We end up criticizing ourselves even more for wanting to be in that space. So tell me, as you were going through this, so I want to know a little bit. Okay, 2021 and 2022 is when you did the big resignation. The first one was in 21. So what happened in 2020? I mean, we were all kind of stuck at home, beat down, and a lot of people absolutely worked from home during that time. Did things get any worse for you during that 2020, or was it better?
Sure, great question. That really started everything because I was working for a global hospitality company at the time, and I was moved to the COVID response task force within about a month of lockdowns. And of course, I feel very honored to do that work to help support the company through a very uncertain time, especially in the hospitality world when demand was cratering. And this was like very much black swan kind of economic crisis in addition to a global health crisis. And it's, I'm holding on then. I'm still doing school at the same time. But then about a month later, 80% of the marketing organization was furloughed for the summer. And on my specific team, that netted out to a team of 9. There were 2 of us who were not furloughed, and it was my boss and it was me. And so, of course, I'm extremely grateful to still have the job and income and all of those things because, of course, it's going through people's heads like, are they going to be able to bring all of us back? And they did ultimately end up laying off about 10% of the corporate team. But at the same time, a part of me, it sounds so terrible, but a part of me was so almost disappointed to have not been furloughed because I'm just I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to do this. But then, I'm having these feelings already because I'm already starting to feel stressed. It was during that time actually that I had my first episode of throwing up blood. So it was even before the CMO job that I had a health situation. And then I had the CMO job come through a month later and I took it and I knew, right? I knew. I look back and there was no part of me that didn't think that job was going to be more demanding. I knew it was going to be, but it was this is the job you've always wanted. And this is a dream opportunity. You would be foolish not to take it. And so I took it, and that's why my hours ratcheted up because I knew it was already going to be hard. And then I get in there and it's really having to fight to prove my worth. And it just really spiraled. And I think that's what can happen to us is that we, to your point, the criticizing, we criticize ourselves and it just gets, we try to compensate for it. Those spirals that we can get in are really difficult because our brains, you almost have to have something that short circuits the scenario to get you to stop and pause and look at what was really happening. And so it took until the shingles diagnosis for that to happen. So yeah, it's something that was even in the making before I got that job.
Right. And that's why I was thinking that, you said you were going through school, you're trying to run this job and then you get the CMO position. But the thing that's in the back keeps running in the back of my head is that this shingles diagnosis. Now, if I understood you earlier, you said you were only in your 30s when you started running this work. And it's known that most people who get shingles diagnosis are in their 50s and above, or in their past in their 50s. Yes. You were a baby. Yeah,
I know.
I'm sitting here like
36 years old.
Wow. I'm like and I kept running in the back. I was like, I know she said she was only 30. So this goes to show you how crazy it is to think that at 36 years old, you end up getting diagnosed with shingles, and something that as
absolutely
somebody in my age, I'm over my mid 50s, and something that's already the conversation has been talked to. Oh, you need to get your shot. I'm like, for what? I got to worry about this now too. But here it is. You have already experienced something that most people don't want to have, but at the same token, that experience was like, at least I get an opportunity to breathe, which is really sad to think that in our society, in our lives, that we have to think of ways of, okay, well, if I get sick or if something happens to me, at least I get a break. And I think for most people during the time of 2020, we all thought that was the big break. But the reality, it really wasn't a big break for people because we all work 10 times harder. I'm a small business owner too. And it's just like, it seemed like the work just wouldn't stop. And from this point, it has not stopped, which I mean, blessed. We have responsibilities, because bills are going to keep coming through whether we like it or not. But at the same token, the reality of realizing that all this hard work that you've put into, you literally hit the wall to the point where you had no choice. So once you went through this process of, understanding you had this diagnosis, you said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go and hang out in Peru and get some relaxation. And then you came back. You made, another turn and said, you know what? I'm moving out of here. Atlanta's just too much for me. Now I'm heading South Florida thinking, that's usually where you can really enjoy yourself and relax. So tell us a little more of the story about what really hit you harder once you got into South Florida.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you're spot on, Kimberly, in that was what was going through my mind. I was having a conversation with a friend from my MBA program as I was starting to realize, like, this CMO job is really not healthy for me. I'm not going to be able to stay here. And I told her, I look back on this version of myself and I'm like, oh my gosh, Sara, you just don't know what you don't know, right? And I have so much love and compassion for her. But I remember telling this friend that I could go anywhere. Like, I'll move anywhere for work. I don't care where it is. As long, if I'm miserable for 5 days a week, like, that's fine, as long as I enjoy my weekends. Because what had started to happen is that I wasn't even enjoying my weekends from the CMO role. I was getting work calls and texts and things like that over the weekends. I was going into the office many weekends too, and my nervous system was so just overloaded by the time I left there that I could not even uncoil enough in those 2 days off per week to be reset by Monday. And so I was saying to her, even if I don't really like the job that much, or I'm living in, I was talking to a boss at the time, and don't get me wrong, I am from Wyoming, but he was in South Dakota, an old boss of mine. He was saying, you could come work here in South Dakota, and here's the thing. I didn't love the cold in Wyoming, but I was just like, I'll just go anywhere. It's fine. I'll just do whatever I need to do. It's cool. If I don't really like it, as long as I just been happy on the weekends, then fine. And I realized as I had the chance to move down here to South Florida that it was a beach town, and I am able to live, I'm 5 minutes from the beach now. I am going to have the opportunity to prioritize my happiness every day. And it sounds so trite, but it just that was not even a thing I ever thought was okay or even knew was a thing. I didn't know. I remember hearing some woman that I was in this kind of mastermind group with, and she was talking about everyday joy. And I had this record scratch moment in my brain because it was does not compute. What are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. That doesn't make sense to me, because I just poured every part of my being into what I could give to an employer. I never thought about what made me happy or brought me joy. So I come down here to Florida and so excited to be in a new environment by the beach. And I definitely cut back on my hours. I'm doing meditation and yoga, and I'm establishing better boundaries as far as not overworking. But during that time, that's when the Wall Street Journal picked up my story from a comment I had posted on LinkedIn. And I shared my story with them, and it hadn't really hit the fan entirely yet. But shortly thereafter, between the interview and when it published a couple months later, it really got bad as far as like some sexually harassing comments. And I just, one of them was even overheard by somebody in October, somebody from HR. And there wasn't an investigation done until January because I was pushing for it. And it was it was another one of those like major awakening moments to realize, okay, burnout is not just about overworking. Burnout is very much about these toxic cultures too, because I've got this nascently healing burnout wound, and walking into that office, not knowing what was going to happen, knowing this person is still there, there's no accountability, like I don't know what's going to happen every single day. It's like a daily paper cut on that nascently healing wound. And it's a funny thing too, is like, as we're talking about that shingles diagnosis, like I had actually cut back my hours significantly by the time the shingles diagnosis had happened. I had graduated from my MBA program 4 months prior, and shingles still hit. And if I think back, that was more so about, I was armoring up to go into that workplace, and guess what happened down here? The exact same thing. I was armoring up to go in. And so they finally did do that investigation. But in my opinion, it was a performative farce of an exercise. And it was like the woman from HR put an hour on my calendar to give me the readout from the investigation. And she read back to me like 10 bullet points that had clearly been approved by legal in 4 minutes. And the bulk of them were like legal kind of boilerplate. Like, we've got an open door policy, and we aim to, or not aim, like we always have a respectful and professional culture, and like, you need to keep this confidential. Like, that was a lot of it, right? That's almost half of the entire thing. There weren't new findings or like new accountability, I guess, really in it, especially for the person who was doing things. Now, he was leaving the organization the following week because he had resigned too. But at the same time, if they hadn't dragged their feet, we could have had accountability if they'd taken care of it in October. And it was just like, it was such a
they were just checking off
disappointing.
The box. Yeah. They were just checking off the box.
And that's all you have to do with the EEOC, is that's all they had to do. So I quit the next day, and I wrote this, like, I was really furious at that point, not only for myself, but for the other women in the organization, because I knew that other things it wasn't just me. And so I wrote this like blistering anti-harassment, power of women's voices resignation letter. And I went into the office the next day, and I sent it to my boss, HR, and the CEO. And I walked back out the door. I didn't even give 2 weeks notice, nothing. I was just like, you all had months to deal with this. You're not getting another 2 weeks from me after this kind of joke of an investigation.
Right, because you already knew what time it was. You already understood how they seen you, how they treated. Right, yeah. You could feel, like you said, why do you have to walk through the door every day, armed up, suited, ready to go, fist clutched, attitude, because you got to deal with this nonsense, and it's ridiculous that they even allowed it and just kind of threw it in your face and say, hey, we handled it, so now let it go and get back in here and do your work. It was that kind of attitude. And don't tell anybody about it. You can't talk to any other employees. It was like, I know you know this, but this needs to be kept confidential. And it's like, it just left such a bad taste in my mouth. And like, that's what I think really happened with both of these resignations, is that good girl version of Sara, who never would have rocked the boat, who always did was what was asked of her, who overworked, who kept her head down. And frankly, if I'm completely honest, I found talk of like gender in the workplace to be an utter waste of time. Like, I felt strongly about, like racial diversity and sexual orientation and things like that. But I guess because I didn't want to be treated as a woman like differently, I didn't want to acknowledge that there were still gender inequities very present in the workplace. Like, I didn't even want to look at it. And then it was one of those things that after I'm kind of broken open by the shingles thing, but I'm just cracked open completely after this experience, when I'm starting to see like, this is a very real thing. The fact that I ignored it really upsets me. I want to stand up for other women now. And that inspired me to talk to women from the Great Resignation
for this journalism project called Raze to Rise that I founded after that, because it was like, I cannot be the only woman who is going through this.
Right.
I know there are millions of women walking out right now. So what are their experiences? I know I'm not the only one getting mired in these spin cycles of burnout, or like going from one toxic culture to another. So, yeah.
Wow. So since you dived into it a little bit, so talk a little bit about the Raze to Rise organization. Tell how it works, and a little bit about maybe some of the stories that you have been able to communicate with other women about.
Yes. It has been so powerful. Well, and the thing is, too, is that it's expanded beyond the Great Resignation and is becoming a book of women from the Great Resignation and women who made big leaps prior. Because what I realized is that as I'm talking to these women, we talk about the Great Resignation for the most part in the form of statistics and numbers, but like, my undergraduate degree, even though I was doing marketing, my undergraduate degree is in journalism. All I could see is like each data point is a story. There is a really powerful personal story in each of these situations when somebody is deciding to quit. And so I wanted to hear what they had to say and what they were experiencing. And it made me realize that like we have such incredible insight and wisdom that we can crowdsource and share with each other. Because I'll tell you what happened when I put out my call for stories for Raze to Rise. In that first tranche, I received an nearly equal number of women reaching out to me who had quit their jobs in the Great Resignation, and women who hadn't quit yet, but were curious about the movement and wanted to really share their experiences and their stories too. And so it was like, this was March or early April, I guess I would say April, that I put out that call for stories. And then within a few weeks, a survey comes out from Deloitte. They surveyed 5,000 women from around the globe, and they found that more than 50% of women intended to quit their jobs in the next 2 years. And then on a 5-year horizon, that number actually skyrocketed to 90%. In that, like, 90% of women, only 10% plans to be with their current employer 5 years from now. And so it was just like, this is huge. There's something powerful here. And with the return to work, it is in companies' best interests as much as they can to like put us back in the box and to get us to go back to the way things were pre-pandemic. It did serve them quite well. You know what I mean? Like going back into the office 5 days a week and other things, and kind of almost forgetting a little bit of that human piece of things where we connected during the pandemic and saw each other as more human than ever, as we're like worried about our coworkers even getting sick in their families and things. And like, we just learned so much more about each other than we ever had, or we were on conference calls looking into their homes. Like, it's an interesting thing that I just felt like we can't lose this. There's an important conversation to be had here. And the more that we can talk about it, the more that we can affect change. And it was like, there are so many women out there who know they're not in the right place and they need to make a move, but they feel like they can't. So how do we pull this together to provide them with the tools and resources they need? And this is not some sort of like sensationalistic, all women go out and quit your jobs tomorrow. It is not like that. It is just, because some people, I'm sure, you get the reputation as the like quit your job girl, but it's not that. This is much more about being conscious architects of our careers. And when we get that knowing that we need to walk away, which we do, and that came through in every interview, is that these women just knew they needed to walk away, even if they were crunching numbers on a spreadsheet, building financial plans, pro-con lists, or talking to other people. Those were all secondary exercises to their knowing. So when we know we need to go, we need to be able to honor that, but do it in a way that is about being conscious and intentional and moving in the direction of what's good for us, creating a career that is aligned with our values, the kind of lifestyle we want, the type of work we want to do, all of those things, so that we're not just making knee-jerk decisions that we come to regret, but we are honoring that part of ourselves that, like, when you know. And this is the toolkit that will help you to get there, that's coming out of this project.
Okay, wow. Yeah, it sounds exciting. And you're right. I mean, we all have that I always kind of call it that little tingle inside. You know we can feel it in our gut when it's time to make the move. Yes. But the biggest problem that most people have, whether you're male or female, is that they don't want to listen to it. They find it hard to believe, you know, and then like you said, well, what am I going to do, or where am I going to go? And having that little bit of faith of saying, you know what, I can do this. I can make that move. And it's okay to be scared. It's okay to have those feelings, because that's a part of growth. It's a part of realizing who you are as an individual, no matter what it is that you've accomplished prior that, and you have definitely shared that same experience tonight, you know, on this conversation about the fact that it does not matter what you've accomplished, but you have to know who you are. You have to know what you're worth. And what you really learned was you were much more worthy than having a title. And that's the reality.
Yep, absolutely. Ooh, that's the reality. So well said. Yeah, it's an amazing thing that there's a new kind of power that is unlocked when we do give ourselves that permission. We listen to that part of us that knows. But, you know, it's really hard. It's for women and men, to your point, but I think it's even harder for women, given exactly what you talked about, the good girl conditioning, put others' needs first, be a caretaker. Part of that is suppressing your needs, desires, wants, all of those things, and not listening to them. So it can be especially scary if you've ignored those for a very long time, maybe all your life, right? Like, this is a habituated response. Ignoring that knowing happens over micro decisions and then big decisions over decades. And so if we're disconnected from that part of us, it's like, oh my God, no, I'm not going to do that. Because you're telling me I'm about to get really uncomfortable and I don't want to do that thing. Yep. But it is this coming back home to ourselves that inspires me most from what is happening out there right now, because I deeply believe that because of this knowing that people are tapping into, and again, it was like we could give ourselves more permission on the other side of the pandemic as we're questioning a lot of things about day-to-day reality and arbitrary rules around work and what success is and like what actually matters. Part of that was being able to say that, you know, maybe there is a different way, and to start to reconnect with ourselves. Like, I think it's almost like women are connecting back with this intuitive parts of ourselves that we had to cut off in workplaces that were designed by men for men. And
that's right.
It's like this natural sort of like this reckoning that's happening that I just love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. This conversation is so great. And we could go on and on and on and on. And
I know.
We're definitely down to the end. And I just, I definitely want to, I don't want you to have to keep telling all the juicy stuff, because we want people to come to you. We want people to tell their stories, because you're right. This is much bigger than just resigning. It's a much bigger ordeal that, like you were saying, when I think about even 2020, like I say, everybody got an opportunity to be human. And it seems like now we're back to that. Forget that, come back to the office. We don't care about your families. We don't care about what you want to do. You're going to get back to working this many hours. Now we got you. You're back in the huddle, so to speak, and you're going to do it our way. And, even to the point where people are now fighting again about whether they can have telework. It's like, why are we having this conversation? We did it for 3 years.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's just ridiculous to have to feel like you're starting over to something that we thought at one point, not to say that all organizations have lost it, but there was a huge point where people actually appreciated each other. And so you can see some of that dynamics.
That's so true.
Falling to the wayside again, because it's all about control. It's all about, well, we got to make this, we got to do this and do that. But then yet still you got 4 million jobs you can't even fill, because the culture has changed. Right. People's mindsets have changed. And like you said, and for women, they're constantly changing, but having a platform and a place to tell those stories, you have definitely provided that. And the Raze to Rise is an amazing organization. I mean, just having this conversation, like I said, tonight has been awesome. And I'm like, we could talk for hours, because what you're talking about is so profound. And it's something that women talk about sometimes in a huddle, but they don't talk about it outside of that huddle. And so,
Yep.
it's truly about trying to move forward, and, you are doing that, and it's much appreciated. But Sara, like I said, we're down to the end of the show, but before you go, I definitely would like for you to tell everybody, what you have going on, how they can get a hold of you if they're interested in telling their story, and what's the next steps.
Yes, definitely. The website is raze2rise.com, and that's Raze as in R-A-Z-E, like Raze as in burn it down, to rise, build it back up. And I would be honored to speak with anyone and hear your story. And you can also find me on LinkedIn and Instagram as Sara J. McElroy. Would love to connect with you, whether you have quit in the Great Resignation, you quit years prior and made a big leap, or you're stuck now. It's my greatest, this work has been more powerful than anything I ever did in my corporate career. And it's such an honor to get to meet incredible women who are talking about these same things and wanting to figure out where to go next. Because the more that we ask these questions and talk about it together, the better off we'll all be, because it gives us permission the more that we allow this to be commonplace and to be a discussion that's held over not just play dates and coffee catch-ups and dinners, but on a cultural level, this is a conversation to be had.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I couldn't said it better myself. Sara, again, it has been such a pleasure to have you on. I'm just excited about, everybody hearing this. If you need to re-listen to this over and over, listen to it. Take the time to realize that it's something you may need, and it may bring that fear out of you so you can move over. So again, like I said, thank you so much, Sara, for coming on. And of course, before we close tonight's show, I would want to talk again about this great resignation and how to inspire your personal self and your career. For those, like I said, who feel that they're stuck, please get off the fence. Realize that you can inspire yourself and know that you are important. You need to have this conversation. You can reach out to me at Kimberly at WSBILC@gmail.com, and I can get you connected with Sara so you can tell your story to her. We will have all of the information, the social media information. It will be on the DM, so you can it'll be in the information, the DM, so forth, so that you can reach out to her personally. But if you feel stuck and you just want to talk a little bit more as well about your goals and turning those dreams into goals, like I say, you can reach out to me directly. Also, if you want more of your resource for success, monetary donations to support the podcast are now accepted. We accept them through Cash App, PayPal, Good Pods, Tip Jar, or go to the website at www.wsbilc.com. Again, we would like to thank you all for listening to us tonight. We will be back next week with more amazing guests. Be sure to follow us on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcast. But until then, enjoy the rest of your evening, and good night.
Good night, everyone. We will be back next Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Follow us on Spreaker, www.spreaker.com/user/WSBI. View our new WSBI website anytime at www.wsbillc.com and on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram.